Dear ministers, dear guests, welcome to the high-level panel of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. Please welcome our moderator, Manuel Otero.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Como podrán.
Hello, everybody.
Voy a hablar en español.
As you realize, I speak Spanish.
Al segundo idioma más,
and this way,
más hablado en el mundo, después.
I will speak here the second most spoken language in the world after Mandarin, but we are living in an interconnected world, and I will benefit from this situation and talk about the bioeconomy. Some of us here on the panel will speak English, some of us will speak Spanish, and one participant will even speak Portuguese, and I love it. And this also reflects our modern times. Our title is From Diversity to Action. We need action in order to achieve a really good bioeconomy in agriculture. I will try to be a good moderator, and I would like to give you some hints and share my ideas with you. And, well, first of all, let's talk about time. We are in Germany, so we should stick to our time limit all the time, and we fulfill our goals. That's the second point. And we will talk about bioeconomy, about things that we share. But most of all, we should finalize by action. That is, highlight what we do together. And the panelists should shine here. Ministers, deputy ministers, undersecretaries, secretaries of state, they will be the experts here. Well, and me, I'm going to tell them my opinion. And of course, I will have a few remarks about the topic that we are discussing today. And I would like to ask you to start the presentation now. And I would like to give you 5 messages. First message: bioeconomy is quite top on the agenda, but we need to think about how we can change it. And also, I would like to say that we must not consider this as a fair system, because there are some things that we should strengthen and some things should be supported, but it's not a failed system. Many things that we experience in the world need to have a more efficient, sustainable, and inclusive agri-food system. And the way how we respond to population growth has to be reflected in consumer psychology. The consumers are further and further away from producers. We need to build bridges. And we need to say that agriculture has to be resilient, because otherwise it's not really agriculture. In Argentina, we've had a drought since 1 month, and the Uruguayan minister will tell us in a moment what is happening in Uruguay right now. But let me tell you, 1 month without rain is really difficult. Biodiversity is a treasure that we must not lose, and this applies all around the world. The bioeconomy must not be considered as something that will drop from the sky. We need to work on it. We need to reflect about how we can harness biomass, how we can use agriculture and forestry to create more values. How can we do that at the local level with so many cities and places? We need to create jobs, and this has to be broken down to the local level too. And we must not forget either that the agriculture, the bioeconomy offers a great possibility for decarbonization. In Brazil, and this is my fourth message, we've had a big conference and we talked about these topics, but we did not only talk about it there, but also at the G20 summit. It's about creating better living conditions for all people in the world. Bioeconomy in Spain is not the same thing as in Uruguay or South Africa or in Brazil or the Philippines. We need to take into account our culture, our history, and of course our economies. We have different value chains in our countries, so there is no panacea, no silver bullet. And this takes me to my fifth message, and as the Director General for Latin America, I can tell you that Latin America today is the region which is endowed with the highest level of resources and biodiversity. And we can create this added value by adopting the bioeconomy. You will learn about national strategies which we promote, and this really has to contribute to improving the quality of life, not only of farmers but also of consumers. And this takes me to my last point. Why are we here? We are here to understand better which contributions the bioeconomy can make to agriculture and agri-food systems. We are here to discuss the similarities and differences between bioeconomies across countries and continents, and we are here to explore opportunities for joint action, better partnerships, synergies, and collaborations to promote global bioeconomy development. If we achieve this, I will be very satisfied with this panel. And I am now going to invite the panelists, the Minister Luis Planas Puchades, Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food of Spain. Minister Planas in 2018 conducted negotiations to this effect, and I admire him for his contributions towards policy making. He is a person who has understood perfectly how the common agricultural policy works of the European Union and how to best implement it for one's own farmers. Please, Minister Planas Puchades, come here to the panel, and I would like to ask you all to give him a hand.
Al Ministro John Steenhuisen.
I would now like to ask Mr. John Steenhuisen to come here. He is the Minister of Agriculture of South Africa. He has had a long career as a parliamentarian. And since July 2024, he has been Minister of Agriculture in South Africa. I would now like to invite Minister of Livestock, Agriculture and Fisheries of Uruguay, Fernando Matos Costa from Uruguay. He is a great Minister of Agriculture. He is the chairman of the Inter-African Conference of Agricultural Ministers, and he is also a member of our Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, where I am the chairman. And I would also like to invite Mr. Pedro Neto. He's the Secretary of Innovation, Sustainable Development, Irrigation and Cooperativism of the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock in Brazil. He participated in long negotiations with Brazil. Brazil is one of the biggest food producers in the world. And of course, he will report about the situation in Brazil. Now, I would also like to ask Mr. Christopher Morales to come to the panel. He's the State Secretary of Agriculture of the Philippines. He is also a specialist for rice, and I think the Philippines are one of the most important countries for food security in the entire world. And as I've just said, I have to contribute to make this panel shine. We will have 3 questions, 1 general question, a second question which will be directed towards each and every individual, and then in round 3 we will conclude with a general round of questions, and then we will have the opportunity for our audience to ask questions, but if you allow me, I will join you. So our general question is the following: what does the bioeconomy mean for agriculture in your country? What are the main pathways for capitalizing on the bioeconomy in your agriculture sector? What economic, social, and environmental factors are most important in your country? I would like to start out with you, Mr. Planas from Spain. Thank you very much to all those present here. I would like to thank all those listening to us. Manuel, thank you very much. You, as the Director General of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, I would like to thank you for this invitation. And we are now talking about something which is of utmost importance for the future. As Minister of Agriculture, I perfectly know that bioeconomy is very important, and we all have our own visions. We have different countries, we have different experiences that we've made in our countries. For instance, I come from a Mediterranean country in the south of the European community, and every project that we launch in agriculture or in bioeconomy, and the most important thing about these projects is that they are sustainable. We are talking about circular economies, and we must not only talk about circularity, but also about sustainability. Just let me mention eucalyptus. We need to understand that eucalyptus is not fit for a circular economy. You could produce celluloses, but it could be a critical element for nature. And it's still important for us, and it's still important for us to be sustainable. Second, you need to keep in mind the economy and the society as a whole. I co-adopted a piece of legislation, the food chain legislation. This is about original producers, industry, and consumers. And everybody should have a fair remuneration, whether they are farmers or pastoralists, or livestock keepers. This is very important. Bioeconomy refers to the future, and I think that we are talking about a complementary issue in economic terms. Of course, we also want to avoid waste, and we also want to avoid food loss and waste, but we also talk about generating a fair income for our farmers. Well, from the point of planetary sustainability, this is of enormous importance. We need to start work and integrate this into all of our policies. I would like to make a very practical remark here and refer to the use of algae as biostimulants. This is something that we've tested in Spain. And of course, you have traditional fertilization, but I think that this new element is very important. And it's also very important to us because we have lots of livestock management in Spain, and therefore it's also important to use the side stream products of agriculture, for instance, the slurry, manure that we can reuse, such as manure for fertilization. And the same applies to the workings of the European Union in order to further promote this idea. And I think it's very important to take this approach. Also, it applies to avocados. For instance, you have a sub-product that could be a side product that could be used for the cosmetics industry or something very simple. I come from Andalusia, and I love the seeds of the olives. And I love olives, and you can use the seeds or to make biogas from them. And then there is another remark. I don't know if I've already exceeded my time limit. I look at a watch that is a clock that is ticking. So I'm kind of distracted, but I'm very German. I stick to my time limit. And I would like to say that innovation is very important for me too. Innovation has a central policy, a central importance for me. Innovation also, first and foremost, requires an effort, a search, a quest. And veterinarians, farmers, and livestock keepers have to get on board. Also cooperatives, agricultural enterprises. Second, financing is very important. Spain, as a member of the European Union, participates in joint projects, and statistics clearly show that there are 700 projects, bioeconomy projects, that we've supported in the last years. They are very interesting. And then finally, another aspect. We are all public servants here, right? So regulation is very important. This means we have to keep things simple and efficient at the same time for our farmers and livestock managers to be able to work with it so that they can benefit from it and that others can also benefit from it. Therefore, the progress in our countries and also the primary sector of our country and also our societies and the entire planet. So thanks again for organizing this panel, and thanks again for the representatives of the German ministries who have cooperated here and the GFFA representatives, because the GFFA is such a great forum for networking and exchanging experiences. Here we have the G20 chairman, and there are so many fora and meetings, so I think we can have tremendous work there. Thank you very much, and I would like to underline two topics: innovation. Of course, you also have to take the farmers on board, and you also have to comply with legislation to simplify life, not to make it more complicated. And now I would like to pass the floor to the Minister of Agriculture of South Africa, and I would like to say that South Africa has had the chairmanship of G20 since the last year, so I would like to hear from you what bioeconomy means for South Africa.
Panelists, but also those who've made the time to come and listen to this very timely discussion, I think. And when we get to a bit later in the program, I think that the convergence aspect of bioeconomy promotion is going to become even more clear. So from the South African context, bioeconomy is a lot more than just around food safety and food security. It also speaks to the long-term sustainability of our agriculture in the country. We see agriculture within the South African context as a country located in the global south as a major driver of employment opportunities, particularly for those who are marginalized. The bulk of people involved in the agricultural sector in South Africa, women, young children, young people, and to be able to create more opportunities through proper stewardship of our biological assets in a country like South Africa. So it goes beyond just food security. It also speaks about economic security and opportunity for more people. Now, we've adopted a bioeconomy strategy. It's currently under the stewardship of the Department of Science and Innovation. And I think that also then speaks to the need to have joined up government when it comes to the bioeconomy. It's not something that can be located in a single ministry. Yeah. It's something that has to be cross-cutting across government if we're going to see effective implementation of it. Because there are so many different moving parts when one speaks about the bioeconomy and the use of biomass and the like, that there needs to be a synergy across government. So I think that the important thing is that countries must have a strategy around bioeconomy, and I'm very glad that South Africa does have one, and that it speaks across a variety of government departments. And I think there's huge opportunities for it going forward, particularly if one looks at the agro-processing opportunities that arise from investment in the bioeconomy. Africa, South Africa, recognized recently in the CADAP renegotiation and the setting out of the new 10-year plan for Africa, has recognized that rather than just exporting raw products, you mentioned avocados and the like, there needs to be greater opportunities for us to value add through the agro-processing aspect of the bioeconomy so that we get greater value for our products and that we create more employment and investment opportunities going forward. It also speaks to how we can maintain, certainly in the South African and African context, one of our largest assets, which is our soil. I think that if one looks at agriculture over the last 2 decades, there's been a drive for maximizing yield and a focus on extracting as much as possible. I don't think enough thought was given in those early days to what the longer-term implications of that are. And only now we're starting to see the impact on soil quality, where the soil has been so overused and so stripped and so damaged by highly dangerous chemicals that it's starting to affect yield. So we need to find ways to ensure, using the bioeconomy, that we are reinvesting in that big asset, which is the soil. Because if we don't get it right from the ground up, pardon the pun, we're not going to be able to have a sustainable agricultural system, and you won't be able to have the sustainable agri-food systems that are so fundamentally important for all countries around the globe. And so we're obviously with the focus on food production to make sure that everybody is able to have a good quality and nutritious meal and access to that meal. It goes far beyond that as well. And so there's a number of other initiatives in South Africa that we're exploring around the bioeconomy, particularly on manufacturing, alternative manufacturing processes, and the like, to be able to open up new opportunities for more people in that particular context. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. But I do think the point that you made at the beginning in your opening remarks is exactly the right one. Not every country can approach the bioeconomy in the same way or necessarily with the same set of circumstances. And so I do think we need to move towards focusing on how we standardize the metrics of measurements. When we hold each other accountable in multilateral forums, are we measuring each other's progress on the same set of metrics, given the unique circumstances that each country faces? I mean, the Global South certainly, I think, has far more different circumstances to the Global North. And I think that we need to use our multilateral fora to be able to find that balance between how we measure each other's progress in this regard. But I certainly think a lot to ponder and a lot to consider and a lot to converge over the coming year.
Muchas gracias, ministro. Quisiera remarcar cómo vincula bioeconomía con
Right. Now we're hearing that bioeconomy is linked to food security. That is, of course, a fundamental precondition. And, of course, this also requires cooperation amongst ministries. That is, of course, complex, but it is the only way that we can ensure that this new policy framework can be managed. And, of course, we need to ensure soil fertility, soil health for the future of humanity. So Now I would like to hand over to Minister Costa from Uruguay. Uruguay is a country that is very close to my heart because we share a lot of things. We have a lot in common in terms of bioeconomy. Thank you, Manuel, and thank you very much for inviting me to attend this panel. I would like to thank and congratulate Germany for organizing this conference, this GFFA, the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture, in the framework, in the margins of the International Green Week, which is so important for this kind of dialogue, this kind of debate. And I'd also like to thank the other panelists. It's a great honor for me to be sitting on this panel and to talk to people with such great experience. I think Manuel illustrated it brilliantly in his introduction. We talk about bioeconomy, which means we talk about sustainability. So these are almost synonyms. They are intrinsically linked. An agricultural country such as Uruguay, of course, is a country with a low number of inhabitants, a low population, but it is, of course, important that we have value chains in agriculture and a strong agricultural sector. So we have a lot of production, and the population is very closely linked. We are an exporting nation. We have a small internal market, and we are very much, of course, interested in producing sustainably, because without sustainability, we will not be able to have a future. If we don't protect our natural resources, we will not have a future. Minister from South Africa mentioned soil health, which of course is a fundamental prerequisite. And it goes beyond the protection of water resources and soil health. And of course also the entire balance in producing food. All of these things are vital for the future. So what can the international community do? What can we expect from the international community? Well, we have different climatic conditions, different production methods and products that we manufacture. So we achieve, or rather receive, outcomes from the exchange and from scientific institutions, which means that we need to make progress. We need to make progress in having the right narrative in the public mind. The narrative is really important. We heard about international fora, where we often hear people talking about emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change, and the like. And often the livestock sector is largely blamed for that. I don't want to dismiss this responsibility. Of course, we need to work on making livestock more sustainable and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, we must ensure, and we should not allow others to point the finger at us all the time. Of course, we are also part of the solution, not just part of the problem. So we have some 800,000 inhabitants. And in 20 years, we will have 25% more, which means that in 2050, we will have 10,000 more people in Uruguay, more inhabitants, which means that we are very willing to solve problems, including hunger. There are many people going to bed hungry. And of course, the solution are sustainable supply chains and production chains. Of course, at the same time, they have to be adapted to climate change. What does that imply? Well, on the one hand, we must protect soils and biodiversity. We must also make our production more sustainable. Naturally, our production system must also be reassessed, realigned. But what is more, we need to cooperate. We need to cooperate in research. We need to get researchers and scientists involved in order to be able to solve these problems that present a challenge for us. We have diseases, we have pests. And of course, we also face certain problems regarding plant health. These are obstacles we need to overcome. How can we make sure that 25% of more people must be fed, and at the same time we have a growing demand which we need to satisfy? So within 25 years, food production needs to grow by 50% without depleting natural resources. How do we achieve that? We need more science and we need more research. We also have tools at hand that might help us. This includes, for example, GMO organisms, and of course we can talk about their ethical and social implications, but of course we need to produce products with better quality, better resistance against pests, and we need to achieve production models that are less invasive and less intensive when it comes to fertilizer input and agrochemicals. So the question is, how can we conduct more research in this area? I want to draw a comparison. Livestock. Livestock can be compared to an apparatus we all have in our pockets, our phones. What applications do we know that are running on our phone? I only use very limited functions, 10% of the apps and the functions that my phone has. And the same is true for agriculture and livestock farming. In essence, we are just aware of one small part of what we have at hand. For example, we want to replace plastics and input. How can we ensure circularity in our systems, and how can we also look at energy consumption and energy production? We are not just producing foods. Maybe we can look at how we can produce materials and energy inputs. We also need to produce fodder and forage. So, if scientists and researchers can produce better results and we can collaborate better, this will help us to really have a fairer and more just trade. And Mr. Plan has already pointed out we shouldn't make the lives of producers harder. We need production systems that are regulated, of course, but these regulations should not add burden and add more red tape and more cost for farmers. Of course, the red tape, we talk about it quite a bit. And of course, this is something that we have in common with the Europeans. For example, the rules on deforestation, that is, of course, another window of opportunity to have discussions. How can we become better at that? Of course, we must protect our environment when it comes to our production systems. So I believe this is really a great opportunity, a vast opportunity to cooperate. We are coming together here at the IICA, the Inter-American Institute, and an American institution that provides excellent opportunities for cooperation, but needs to also focus more strongly on production. It is not just about protecting production, but also rural communities. Look at, for instance, the aspect of production and consumption. It is important that we understand the comprehensiveness of this problem, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much indeed. So we really have seen that there is a new agenda for research and cooperation, and also a narrative that creates justice and fairness, and of course tremendous opportunities of sustainable agriculture. Now I should like to hand over to Pedro Neto. He is... Thank you, Manuel. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and greet all the ministers who are here today. It's an honor for me to be here. Bioeconomy. Well, Brazil is a country that is extremely diverse in terms of biology, and we have roughly 850 million hectares, 6 biomes that all have their own characteristics, which means that we have a very specific set of biodynamics. Over the last 50 years, Brazil has moved on from an importing country to one of the most important exporting nations around the world. This transformation was, of course, linked to the changes that we have seen in terms of land use. We have a strategy about sustainable development. It has been implemented for 14 years, and it is really about agricultural inputs because we focus on 3 key technologies, fundamental aspects of biology, and also in terms of livestock. We use new technologies and genetics. We have seen over 20 years that there is a more respectful treatment and management of our environment. This includes the protection of soils and waters. It has already been addressed. This is linked to the conservation of the livestock sector, which results in us having made progress. So we have a very robust forestry law as well. This provides for the protection in terms of protection areas, and of course also a clear definition of areas that should be within these protected areas for agricultural production. I was talking about the last 50 years, and over the past 20 years we have seen an intensification, but over the past 2 years we have seen some shifts. We have a policy on food production which was introduced. This includes a number of ambitions, very interesting and contextualized in the context of organic farming. And this is something that I think is important for South America, but the entire world as well. We are moving towards bio-based production, which means that we are trying to tackle the most important challenges we are facing with regard to our planet, climate change. What does that imply? Well, we have consolidated bio-based production in terms of livestock and farming. We also want to cooperate with other government agencies, environmental agencies, rural development, agricultural development, and the like. We have an enormous potential for getting people involved, for inclusion. So this is a tremendous value we are creating. We also get indigenous, traditional peoples involved, and they are getting involved in this type of production, and they of course have traditional knowledge. At the same time, there is some development in terms of research which can also make a contribution in terms of bioeconomy. I already spoke about the national policy that we have adopted, but we also have a national plan for agricultural inputs, which means that we have several pathways for making us less dependent on external resources. This includes, for instance, some examples of how we achieve that. We want to make stronger use of domestic products. There is hence a tendency for the sector to progress the agricultural and food system. Well, it evolves and develops, and this also includes rural areas, research, and of course we also focus more on bio-based production, which can be a response and provide answers in terms of technology, because this really is a way to fulfill the commitments we have made, every country has made when it comes to the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, in terms of climate stewardship. Brazil has laid down its goals and presented them at the COP in Baku, and we will continue with our efforts to make sure that issues such as bioeconomy And other topics such as regional value creation, local value creation is being taken care of and is taken into account towards a sustainable and resilient agriculture. Of course, a lot remains to be done, and we need a lot of cooperation amongst countries, but we are observing that the tendency is clear and the path is clear. Right. I would like to draw your attention once again to what Pedro just mentioned. 50 years ago, Brazil was a country that had a lot of food insecurity, high levels of food insecurity, and now you have introduced a system, or rather introduced a system that has become very famous, which meant that Brazil has turned into a country that can export countries. Now I should like to invite a State Secretary from the Philippines to take the floor. Christopher Morales, you have the floor.
In this panel, together with these distinguished gentlemen, to answer your question directly. For us in the Philippines, bioeconomy is about making agriculture smarter, more sustainable, and more inclusive. It's about using the gifts of nature, and that is the crops, soil, water, and even our agricultural waste, using it in ways that are efficient and eco-friendly, and also beneficial for everyone, and especially for our stakeholders, our farmers and future folk. What we're doing to maximize the bioeconomy, our focus is on practical innovations that directly help our farmers and our communities. And these are, first is boosting soil health through balanced fertilization. We have this current implementing programs, the Balanced Fertilization Program for the rice industry, to improve our soil fertility to the use of biofertilizers, organic amendments, organic fertilizer, and better soil management practices. We aim to restore degraded lands in order to enhance our productivity and reduce the need for chemical inputs. Reduce, not eliminate, because we need to feed our people, 120 million people, and this not only cuts costs to our farmers, but also make our farming system more sustainable for the long term. Second, we are also using the alternate wetting and drying irrigation methodology. It saves water and cut emissions as well. We are introducing these in the rice farmers, and we hope to reduce keeping our fields constantly flooded. If you use this technology, it will decrease about 30% of water use during normal rice production system, and definitely it reduces harmful methane emissions. Third is we use also drones for precision farming. We're bringing technology like drones to the fields, and these drones help us do direct seeding, apply fertilizers, and monitor crops with precision. It reduces the labor cost and makes farming more efficient, especially for our younger farmers who are excited about using technology in agriculture. The average age of our farmers now is 57 years old. Fourth is solar-powered irrigation for all-year farming. Through solar-powered irrigation systems, we are giving our farmers consistent access to water even in dry season. The systems don't rely on fossil fuels, so they save energy and reduce costs, especially for those in our remote areas. Fifth is turning waste into value. We're finding ways to reuse our agricultural waste, like turning rice husks and coconut shells into bioenergy or organic fertilizers. This supports circular economy and reduces waste in our farms. And lastly, growing opportunities in our aquaculture. We've also invested in seaweed farming, which provides livelihoods in our coastal communities. And seaweed isn't just for food, it's also used for bioplastics, cosmetics, and even medicines. So, initially, what are the results we're seeing? To summarize, farmers using the alternate wetting and drying irrigation methodology are saving money on water while reducing their environmental footprint. Drones are cutting farm labor costs and boosting productivity. Balanced fertilization and use of biofertilizers are helping crops grow better, improve soil rejuvenation without harming our environment and ecosystems. Solar irrigation gives farmers the chance to plant even in harvest seasons. And waste-to-value projects are creating extra income for farming communities while reducing pollution. Beyond these numbers, these changes are giving our farmers and fisherfolk hope. They're seeing that agriculture can be profitable, sustainable, and modern.
Muchas gracias. Querría enfatizar el concepto de que necesitamos poner en marcha una agricultura
Thank you very much.
que transforme desechos.
Thank you very much. This is an example for smart agriculture by turning waste into fertilizer. And now I would like to come to question number 2, and here I go back to the State Secretary from the Philippines. The Asian countries will experience high population growth in the next 25 years. That means that there will be an increasing demand for food, especially protein. What role can bioeconomy play in this scenario? You are a specialist for rice farming. Rice is very important for the Philippines. Could you refer to this? What is the future of the rice industry with regard to the bioeconomy?
We are now 115 or 116 million people. So our recorded live births last 2023 is about 1.44 million. So that's a 13 births per 1,000 population. On the average, about 3,969 were born daily, 165 per hour, or nearly 3 babies every minute. So the pressure for us to produce is very significant. It's a challenge for us. And the population growth is expected to exceed 150 million by the next decade. So this will drive increased demand for food, thereby increasing pressure for our resources, that is our soil and water. As you know, Asian countries' staple food is rice. It plays a critical role for us, and we will attack this in 3 ways. One, first is providing or enhancing farm productivity through the use of high-yielding varieties, modern technologies, and sustainable practices. But also important to this is, the second one, is demand management. We need to bring back our per capita consumption of rice to 110 kilograms per person annually to now more than 120 as of today, 120 kilograms per person annually. So if we reduce the demand for food, definitely it will reduce the pressure on our natural resources. And secondly, if we reduce the per capita consumption, we will save about, including the demand management, meaning providing alternative staple like white corn or adlay, about 5 million Filipinos annually will have enough rice with this kind of decrease in the pressure in our natural resources. Meeting these challenges calls for a balanced strategy that combines increased agri-productivity with sustainability to safeguard essential natural resources like, as I said, water and soil. The bioeconomy framework presents an effective solution by promoting efficient, productive, and environmentally sustainable agri-systems. By adopting this approach, Philippines can address its growing demand for resources while minimizing environmental impact. So, our vision for the future, as our population grows and dietary preference shift, the bioeconomy is central to our strategy as a sustainable and productive agriculture sector. It helps us strike a balance between meeting the needs of today's population and preserving resources for future generations. Bioeconomy is not just about technology or innovation, it's about empowering our farmers and fisherfolk, reducing our environmental footprint, and ensuring that every Filipino or every person in the world has access to nutritious food. And together, I believe that an agriculture sector that feeds our people, sustains our planet, and secures our future.
Muchas gracias. Me gustaría recalcar el concepto de que la bioeconomía necesita empoderar a los agricultores y al mismo tiempo convencer a los consumidores que están recibiendo alimentos de calidad.
At the same time, we have to convince consumers that they do not only consume, but they also take into account the environment. I would like to ask a question to Pedro. In Brazil, a conference was held where the bioeconomy was made a priority. This was the most important topic at the G20 summit. What were the results of this? And I would also like to congratulate you that because we have many comments that say that deforestation has been reduced in Brazil. This is quite encouraging. Many people have told me about this. This was really great. Okay, so I'll start out with this point. Talk about the containing deforestation. At the beginning of 2023, we redefined some public policies, anti-deforestation policies, for instance, plans for the conservation of the Amazon region. In the first quarter of 2023, I think this was one of the first decrees that Lula adopted, was the reinforcement of these plans and the review of these plans. This was very urgent at the time. This is something that the Brazilian government tackled right away. That is, monitoring deforestation in the Amazon and also in Cerrado. There is an interministerial committee which deals with these monitoring questions quite closely. But let's look at the G20 strategy. We are talking about prevention nowadays and about preventing deforestation in the Amazon region. This is done via command and control. It's also crime, fighting crime. But for people who live there, people who do legal activities, they should also have other possibilities of generating income. These are the factors that need to be increased. The G20 declaration on agriculture is underpinned by a plan on bioeconomy. In Brazil, we also have a climate plan with 4 working groups. It's about climate change mitigation. The revision of Brazilian NDCs. And all of this led to the work of Brazil being enriched. G20 dealt with this issue, but it's very important that also the current G20 presidency will carry forward this issue. President Lula, well, this was no more than 2 months ago. He launched a new piece of legislation which underlined our preparation to share this issue not only within G20, where we had this declaration, and we want to contribute to G20 negotiations. And I've also been a part of these negotiations with the ministers of agriculture. So there were many delegations, but also observers present at these negotiations. And this momentum, this dynamism of negotiating this declaration, that was by no means simple. There were some countries which had to make compromises. And finally, we had this declaration on food security.
Ratificado pelo GT de Agricultura, mas foi assinado com os chefes de Estado, que é a Aliança Global contra a Fome e a Pobreza.
And there is something that President Lula submitted, and this is the fight against poverty and hunger in the world. So we see that the government makes considerable efforts to this effect. And finally, we should make it possible that humans can live in harmony with other people and with nature. In Brazil, we've had this discussion for quite some years, but now we also have this discussion in other international fora. And the issue of deforestation is also one element of this debate that is now being conducted in Brazil. So we also need a debate on economic opportunities for the local Amazon region population and the local population in other areas. And this way, illegal deforestation could be reduced. If you allow me, I would now first like to ask the Minister of South Africa. South Africa has the current G20 presidency, and the importance of the bioeconomy has already been underlined. What will South Africa do? What is your working agenda? And what is the role of agriculture that you intend to have there?
There are two very important things that emerged from Brazil's G20, and many of us are privileged to be in your country for it. I think the first is the Global Alliance Against Hunger, and certainly South Africa has already signaled its commitment that we want to continue building on the platform that was laid there. But I think the other important thing that came out of Brazil's G20 was the G20 implementation of the bioeconomy, the GRB. And it set out very clearly in Brazil the 10 principles that should be followed by countries in implementing the bioeconomy in their country. And certainly what we would be doing over our course in terms of GRB 2025 in the course of the South African presidency is obviously building on that, and then to focus some discussions, some normative discussions on what I spoke about a bit earlier. How do we develop the metrics that are going to be required to measure our goals towards climate goals, and to highlight the need to base the bioeconomy on accurate science and measurable outcomes, because that's how we're going to be able to measure progress against the 10 principles. We have to have a common metric of measurement. And so we want to continue to drive the bioeconomy in line with those 10 principles, and we're going to prioritize bioeconomy policies and developments that encourage member states and to prioritize the economic aspects and agricultural aspects of and environmental protection aspects of the bioeconomy. And I think that there's what I spoke about a little bit earlier about convergence and the importance of convergence, and just how significant the G20 presidency for South Africa is under the themes of sustainability, equality, and solidarity. Speaks about how we build this cooperation in the multilateral forum. But we're also lucky because Colombia has committed to prioritize the bioeconomy during its COP16 presidency, and Brazil is obviously, as we've heard now, going to continue with their efforts under its UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the COP30 presidency. So we've had this unique opportunity now with this convergence between these three important multilateral fora around the world to really put the bioeconomy and our efforts to both implement and measure it at the heart of the global agenda. And I certainly think there's an opportunity there. And I come back again to this last week's deliberations in Kampala, where the African Union set out its new 10-year plan for agriculture. At the heart of that is the bioeconomy and how we use the bioeconomy to ensure that agri-food systems are sustainable on the continent going forward, and how we use agri-food systems to grow economies and make sure that we meet the basic needs of people. And so I think you there have this huge alignment from the African Union side, setting out a very clear set of measurable objectives for its member states to get behind the bioeconomy and its role in making sure that agri-food systems are there. So this will be front and center in South Africa's G20 presidency, building on the incredible platform that was laid by Brazil. And we hope then as well, by doing that, that we start to cement the bioeconomy, food security and sustainability into the G20 agenda going forward.
Muchas gracias. Me parece que todos coincidimos que la clave es transformar las declaraciones políticas en estrategias de desarrollo y en modelos de negocio.
Does everybody agree that the key strategies, development models are in order to make progress? I will now ask the minister from Uruguay to take the floor. The bioeconomy was set up as a new input strategy. How can Uruguay realize these strategies? Maybe, Fernando, you can talk about sustainable livestock keeping. And all of this, please, in 3 minutes. Thank you, Manuel. You turned the original chronology upside down. Well, we were invited by Brazil, and I would like to come back to this right away. I would like to congratulate Brazil as a former G20 presidency, and I would like to wish South Africa every success in its new presidency. With a view to bioeconomy, Brazil has also underlined the necessity of talking about sustainable livestock husbandry in connection with environmental protection. We were invited not only to the G20 meeting, not only as a country, and we are also a neighboring country, but we were also invited to the other G20 meetings. We were also invited as IICA, as FIO. We participated in the debate. And I think one of the most important debates about the global strategy is about the bioeconomy of livestock husbandry, so that you have sustainable and productive systems. It's important to take into account some points. Well, the G20 presidency has shifted from Brazil to South Africa, but we will have COP30, which will return to Latin America after many years, and we will also have a resurging debate on countries which have a focus on livestock husbandry. This is all linked to sustainable production. And in this regard, of course, also Uruguay is committed to sustainable farming. For many years, Uruguay has had legislation which considers the aspects of soil protection, forest conservation. There is a law from 1998, and also the traceability of meat and livestock. So every livestock which is born in Uruguay has its own ID number, so you know what the animal has done from birth to the slaughterhouse. So even in our coat of arms, we have the head of a bull, which symbolizes our national wealth. And therefore, it is so important to take into account the studies and guarantees and put them on the table. I think that in particular with regard to livestock farming, where we often have unfounded accusations that our production is a great polluter, you really need to look at the results of research and the metrics, and you should really measure the way we pollute. For instance, ruminants. There really is. It's really a miracle. Fibers are transformed into high-quality proteins, and these are two chemical phenomena. First of all, the digestion of the ruminant, but also the photosynthesis with its importance. That is, you capture solar energy, and at the same time, you capture carbon in the soil. There is no other cycle with this capacity. And this should really be the basis of our work, because we do not only produce greenhouse gases, much less so than during apple production, but we also have the key for decarbonization and for creating fuel parks, fuel power plants, and methane is one of the most important climate gases, and it's not only propelled by livestock production but also by fossil fuels, but it stays much less in the air than the fuel fuel-induced methane. So we need to have a much more nuanced discussion in international fora. And Brazil and our region, we have lots of livestock farming, but this debate should really be put to an international level, also in connection with trade. Uruguay is dependent on international trade. Well, international trade now has a tendency towards becoming more protectionist, but we can't have more protectionist measures with regard to environmental measures, because this has already been proven wrong by science. Thank you very much, Fernando, and you've convinced me so much that I will have a steak for dinner in connection with the circular economy. Minister Luis Planas from Spain will also now talk to us and share their experience with horticulture, because they are the biggest vegetable growers in Europe. And I would like to ask you about the role of climate change and about Spain's role in the global production.
Well, it is very difficult to put this briefly, just a few minutes, but I will try my very best. I would like to say one thing to start with. It is so brilliant to sit with you on this panel, a South American, African, European panel, if you will, and we can all acknowledge that we have some common ground. And of course, we have some things that complement each other, although we come from different parts of the world. I think we have underlined it in our interventions. I am a European, Southern European citizen, and I think naturally I feel positive and confident, because we are the strongest growing economy in Europe. And of course, this is also linked to the fact that we have our food industry, because we feed 48.5 million inhabitants, and we have a large number of tourists. Of course, they also had their fair share of food with us, and of course, we have a large share of exporting as well. So 77 million, or rather 75 billion in terms of exports. That is something I'm very proud of, I have to say. And I think there are two arguments that have already been mentioned. On the one hand, bioeconomy. We all talked about air, soil, and biodiversity. Christopher rightly pointed it out. Water also matters. Let me add something to that. Using water and water consumption that is non-conventional is worth mentioning. Recycling water. We have a systematic scheme on the Canary Islands to do that, and also in the eastern parts of Spain. This is key for producing food in Spain, because we have very little irrigation. We are very close to the African continent. So the area in northern Africa and southern Europe is very vulnerable in terms of water and water consumption, which means that we have to really promote water consumption that is sustainable. This includes precision farming, but I think Fernando illustrated that excellently. And I think you are right in saying that we shouldn't just congratulate ourselves. On the other hand, we also should not have a too negative stance on our farmers, because they are the main stakeholders and the main players. They are the ones responsible in protecting our soils, our land, our bioeconomy. And of course, this plays a vital role. And one more thought. It has already come up briefly. Using organic fertilizers and bio-based fertilizers, that is vital. And one last comment, a topic that has not really popped up in the debate, but I still think it's very important to mention it, which is the topic of consumption and responsible consumption of foods, preventing food waste and preventing food losses. This is, of course, part of the 2030 agenda. So we are right. We are about to implement that. The Green Deal, of course, is an important tool. It is vital for us to look at human consumption and make it responsible, because that is something we really need to draw our attention to. Food must be used as food, and then in a cascading use, it can be used for different purposes. But I believe that in the times we are faced with, we need to focus on these issues more strongly. We live in times when we need fair trade that is rules-based. We should not set up more barriers. We need more horizons, more exchange, and that is really where the future lies. It has been such a great pleasure to be sitting on this panel with these colleagues, with these ministers, who also are committed to this idea. And we in Spain, of course, uphold this idea. Thank you, Luis. So we all agree we need rules-based fair trade with fair prices for everyone, for the producers, and profitable agricultural products. So this is a way for us to have a positive growth. So we are really running out of time, but I should like to ask every one of you to give a concluding remark, the takeaways, the 3 priorities you would like to take home from our cooperation here between the different continents and countries. Luis, take it away. Give us the last comment you have for the audience. I believe that this dialogue and how it played out really shows that we are doing something that is very similar indeed. We're trying to come together, and we are looking at bioeconomy. This is a new path which we are exploring. So we need to cooperate, we need to come together. We can learn a lot from each other. We all, of course, have our different circumstances and conditions, but we can benefit from that. Every single one of us. It is not just about producing food, after all. It is also about the future of rural areas and young people, women. All of these people must have a future. They must be able to produce the food that they need. And I don't have 3 messages, but this has been one core message. Now, John.
Yeah, thank you. And I really would agree with my colleague from Spain. This has been a most enlightening discussion, and I certainly hope it's the start of a longer conversation. I think it comes down to implementation. I think we've got to move it now out of the fora and actually into implementation on the ground. Secondly, we do need to have a discussion around financing of this, because the ability to finance the transitions it differs from country to country. And certainly in the African context, when you're moving people from one traditional way of doing your agriculture to a more sustainable, bioeconomic, sensitive way of doing it, there is going to be a lull in production, as my farmers tell me in South Africa. And we need to find a way to bridge that gap to get them across to this. And then also bringing farmers along with you, the agricultural sector, allowing them to understand that, yes, there may be some short-term disruption, but in their own interest, for their own sustainability of their farming enterprises, the quality of their soil and their yield, this makes sense for the longer term. And thirdly, the point I would make is education throughout the value chain. Mm-hmm. Consumers actually have a huge role to play as well, because consumers need to be taught to incentivize those who are adopting these strategies and to reward those who are doing them. It cannot be a situation where farmers move towards more sustainable farming practices, but there's no difference then between people who are farming in an unsustainable way and the sacrifice they've now made to be better stewards of the environment and their ground. We have to find ways through the value chain of incentivizing people to take this seriously and to bring them along on the journey. And I think those three things, I think we can get those things right: implementation, education, and bridging. I think that we'll be well on our way to making sure that this becomes an entrenched way of the future.
Muchas gracias. Fernando, tu turno, por favor.
Bueno, hago pie en el aspecto de la comunicación.
Right. I should like to talk once again about communication and education. We are faced, in my opinion, with a tremendous challenge regarding livestock, the livestock sector. There is always a narrative that comes up, and there are also scientific foundations. All of us who are here today, we have political responsibility. We face challenges regarding the public opinion and the lack of understanding in public. This is a problem we all face. So we really must ensure that we teach people how important it is to do the things we are talking about. Look at urban populations. If we ask them about livestock farming, they will have a more negative view rather than a positive one. So this is really a factor that plays a role with regard to what Luis mentioned. This is something we are facing, a generational shift. Our farms are growing in size, and the daughters or sons no longer want to be farmers like their parents. I don't want to say that they have experienced stigma, but they have a rather negative image and seek better job opportunities and different opportunities, for example, living in urban areas rather than rural ones. So the question is, what will happen if we no longer have farmers to farm our land, and if we no longer have agriculture, if there is no one to work on the fields? It is becoming an ever-growing challenge. So what does that imply? Well, we need to really continue to also look at climatic conditions, climate change. We need to take account of diseases, pests and animal diseases. All of this needs to be taken into account, which means that it's becoming ever more difficult. Education is key, not just in order to teach people and impart knowledge, but also for society as a whole. We are facing a tremendous challenge. Bioeconomy can really help us in this regard. We can make sure that our farmers understand that there is someone on the other side, a consumer, for instance, with a vision that may not be quite as, or rather a point of view that is not quite as positive as ours. So this is really a challenge we have to tackle. We as politicians, as policymakers, need to take action. Sometimes we feel like we may have failed in our efforts, but we need to improve knowledge and information that can really help us to make people understand of the importance of agricultural production. The value chain and food production must be appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Fernando. Now, Pedro. Thank you very much indeed. I would just like to once again reiterate that it has been a great honor to be here. Brazil will have a very exciting year. COP30 will happen in 2025. We will have a Mercosur meeting, and we will also have the Inter-American Agriculture Ministers meeting and BRICS. So, what does that mean? We will, of course, talk about bioeconomy in all of these processes and fora. We will talk about forests, climate change, agricultural production, and the like. So, this is our agenda for 2025. We will also, of course, talk to other countries in South America and around the world. We will also invite them to talk about restoration and food security. Well, how shall I say? Of course, we in Brazil want to look at our hectares and hectares of soils that are depleted, which we need to restore and can be restored in order to help us with agriculture. We also want to talk about climate funding. Of course, we have resources, and it is our duty to share these resources. So we need to really make sure that access to climate funding is facilitated, is eased. These are things that are on our mind and will be on our mind. There is no time to lose. And, well, the agenda has been drafted, it has been tabled. We want to restore soils, irrigation, bioeconomy, technology, and the like. Of course, another aspect is fair trade. So, we want to aim to have a fairer path towards our future in respect of environment and our societies.
Make it short but sweet. First, for the T aspect, first we need to raise awareness and share knowledge. So we need to develop and disseminate a compendium of best practices, like what we are shared a while ago. And these knowledge products should be accessible through different platforms and dedicated websites. But in order to practice this compendium of best practices, we need support for financial support, like World Bank, FAO, or Global Environmental Facility, in order to support country and regional programs in bioeconomy, circular agriculture, and climate adaptation. The third is initiating regional capacity building programs and fostering collaboration through like this one, and also, but more importantly, transforming our good intentions into impactful actions, which requires regional or global cooperation and a clear roadmap. I'll propose a 3 C's for this regional collaboration, prioritizing the 3 C's. Fourth, if you conclude me as the fourth C. But the 3 C's include converge, we need to cooperate, and we need to coordinate. We can address shared challenges while fostering innovation and inclusivity.
Muchas gracias a todos por sus aportes. Como moderador veo que me han citado.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all of you.
Tan interesantes. Yo quería hacer algunos breves comentarios. Para mí, lo que significa
I would like to say a few words on the things that have been mentioned. I would like to add to what has been said.
Para lo cual debemos cambiar.
I don't want to be your facilitator. Rather, I would like to become one player here on the stage. We need to overcome our silos, our isolation. We need to draft new communication concepts. The contributions that we can make, well, we can contribute to these new strategies. They are on the table. I think agriculture is a systemic factor, and what we need is a new narrative. This new narrative, well, it must result in changes, in a transformation in the public eye. We need to engage in a dialogue with consumers. We need to have a dialogue with other ministries. We need to also look at the role of the private sector. Of course, we are running out of time here at this point, but we all very much know and are aware that one country alone cannot solve this issue. We need to cooperate because we all live on the same planet and time is running out. We need to think of our children, our grandchildren. We need to have a swift transformation. So, allow me to thank you once again. It's been a great honor to facilitate this debate and give a round of applause for all of